Hello everyone, my name is Stephanie Rodriguez. I will be performing a fairy tale story called Sophie and the Six Swans, a tale by the brothers Grimm, as retold by King Jacobs and adapted from first narrative person. I hope you enjoyed the story as much as I did. There once was a princess named Sophie. Every morning, Sophie and her mother would feed the royal swans. One morning, Sophie's mother turned to her and said, "Know, my darling, that you are Princess Sophie of the Swans. You are brave and gentle like these noble birds, but sometimes you hide your noble heart. Remember, be brave, but also kind." The castle was a happy home. Sophie and her six brothers would run around the castle chasing one another. Laughter could be heard throughout the castle. But then one day, suddenly, everything changed. Sophie's mother fell ill and passed away. In his sorrow, the king grew distant with the children, even though he still loved them. The king began to wander the castle and then further out into the forest. One day, the king did not come back home, and Sophie thought her father to be lost for good. But then one day he returned, and with him the king returned with a new wife. Sophie's new stepmother had lived in the enchanted forest. She had found the king lost and heartbroken, and once he had recovered, she guided him back home. Villagers whispered of the stepmother's strange powers. Sophie resented that her stepmother had taken her mother's place, and she tried to convince her father that Sophie's stepmother was not a right fit for their family. Overhearing her words, Sophie's stepmother became angry. Fearing the wrath of the stepmother, the king took the children to a distant castle where he hid them. Sophie and her brothers thought themselves safe from their stepmother, but then one day she appeared before them. Sophie's stepmother cast a spell on 6 woven shirts, and she threw them into the wind, where they flew and went into Sophie's 6 brothers, where magically they were then transformed into 6 giant swans. Sophie's stepmother turned to her and said, "Look, sweet Sophie, if you want your brothers back, then listen. You must collect thistles and weave them into 6 shirts. You must use the thistles that are thorny just like you are, and harsh. If you want your brothers back, you cannot speak one word to anyone, or they will stay swans forever." Fearing her stepmother, Sophie ran away from her stepmother in search of her brothers, but she was determined to change them back. After a brief reunion with her brothers, Sophie found herself at the shore of a lake. Sophie built a small hut where she began to work on the first shirt. She gathered thistles that grew nearby in the lake, and she cut them up to weave into cloth. Soon Sophie was sewing her first shirt, ignoring the pain that stung and stabbed. Many years passed, and Sophie continued to work on the shirts. Rumors began to circulate that there was a mysterious mute swan girl that reached the king of that land named Joran. One day, Sophie heard Joran and the guards coming towards her hut. She grabbed all her shirts and she climbed up the nearest tree. When Joran and his guards found Sophie in the tree, Joran said, "Why are you all alone? Why are you wild and ragged? We will not take your shirts because I see you treasure them, but we shall take you back to the castle." Reluctant to leave, Sophie was taken to King Joran's castle, where she was cleaned up and given these beautiful clothes to wear. At the castle, Sophie continued to work on the shirts, but she felt very much like a prisoner. King Joran found Sophie's muteness strange, but he quickly came to care for Sophie. He would sing to her to make her happy while she worked on her shirts, and he even collected thistles, though his hands bled, and made a special wheel for Sophie to use the thistles and make them into cloth. Soon Sophie became happy at the castle, and she fell in love with Jorn. Love blossomed between the two, and soon Sophie and King Jorn were married. After the birth of their daughter, Sophie was so close to finishing the last sixth shirt. But without warning, Sophie's stepmother suddenly appeared, and she stole Sophie's daughter from her. Unable to speak about what had happened or risk failing to lift the curse on her brothers, Sophie was blamed for the disappearance of her daughter. Sophie was set to be tried for witchcraft and to be judged by none other than her husband, the king. But before Sophie was taken to the square for judgment, she grabbed all the shirts. At the square, where she was to be judged, the villagers cried that Sophie's silence was proof of her deceit. Suddenly, Sophie heard rustling of wings, and she threw the shirts she had taken with her up into the air. 6 swans flew into the shirts and were then transformed into 6 beautiful young men. Finally, the curse was lifted. Though the youngest brother had remained, his left arm remained a swan's wing, an unfortunate event, for the last shirt, the 6th shirt, had not been completed. With Sophie's brothers back to human form for the most part, Sophie was able to tell her husband about her stepmother's treacherous acts. King Jorn had never doubted Sophie, and soon their daughter was returned by none other than Sophie's father. Sophie's stepmother was gone for good, for once the spell had been broken, the thread of her life had been cut. Though at first the curse of Sophie's stepmother's spell was a curse, it became a blessing in disguise. Sophie learned the power of words, and that silence could be a good thing, for in the silence of one's thought, one might be able to hear the flight of birds. That's the end of my story. I hope you enjoyed it.